Hey, good afternoon, Sam. How are you doing? So this is our second to last lecture for this class. So how are you doing this week? So he's still connecting to us. So we're getting to the last, we're in week 11 of this class, and we only have one more week left. And so in the week 11 forum, all you have to do is just post the rough draft of your comparison contrast essay. So your comparison contrast essay was the same essay that you started in week 7 and week 8. So we're going to be working on the comparison contrast essay, and you're going to post your rough draft for week 11, and then in week 12 you will post your final draft of your comparison contrast essay, and then you're done with the class. Are you excited about being done with this class?
Almost, yes. I don't
So,
know what's going to come next.
so what classes are you? Oh, I guess because we're being public. All right. So you're looking forward to your next classes?
Yes, at least one of them I know it's going to be hard, so I like it.
Oh, okay. All right. So how long is this program gonna take for you to finish?
For me, including these months, 2 years.
2 years. Okay. Well, let's get started because you might someday have to write that science paper because the longer you stay in college, the higher your chance of having to write that science paper. And when you get to the graduate level, then all the material that you're writing will be brand new, as in what someone else has not done before. Right now, all the papers you're writing are just based on foundational knowledge. In other words, you're writing about what other people have already written because right now you're still learning what other people have done. So first you got to learn what other people have done before you know, oh, okay, nothing is like this has been done before you can offer your unique topic. And so for me, that happened after 5 years of college. And then by the fifth year, you go into your master's program, and then in order for you to write your paper, it has to be on a topic nobody else has done before. And then your contribution is unique to the world. But before you get to that stage, you still have to read up on what everybody else has done first in order for you to know what's considered unique. Capiche? Yeah. Usually the
Yeah.
first 2 years of college is just a lot of reading of what everybody else has done and memorizing a lot of new terms. So that's what you're doing right now. It's the least fun of college is having to learn what everybody else has done. It gets a lot more fun is when you start to drive the car and you drive what's going to happen next. So let's explore the wonderful world of science papers. So here is how you write a social science paper, which is what I did for my master's when I did it a long time ago. Let's see. This should go like this. Here we go. And so, how to write a science paper. And so, we're not going to go over the week 11 rough draft. Before I start my science paper presentation, I will give a few pointers on how you can do your week 11 forum. This will be your last peer review forum. This week we are on the last stage of the writing process, rewriting. So remember, the writing process involves pre-writing, which is week 7 and week 8. Writing is when you convert the outline to the rough draft, and then week 11 forum is rewriting, and in week 12 you will submit your final essay. That will count as your final grade. So for your week 11 forum, you will post the rough drafts of your week 7 essay. Make sure you include the corrections and feedback from students in your final draft or you will lose points. And so you have all shown tremendous progress, but most of you are still weak in APA. Here's an example of someone's APA here. So anytime you have any kind of dates, you have to have the author, the date, and the page number. And some of you had trouble understanding what a citation, in-text citation is. So here an in-text citation is inside the body of your paragraph. When you have a direct quote, you have to have beginning quotation mark and you have to have an ending quotation mark, which I can't seem to, this one's not correct because it's missing an ending quotation mark. Remember your week was a week 5 quiz that you got to have a beginning
Yeah.
quotation mark and an ending quotation mark. I think it's over here. Okay, so the ending, anyway, so beginning and ending quotation mark, and then you got to have your author, your date, and the page number. And then when you do a direct quote, when you do a paraphrase quote, you don't need quotation marks and you don't need that page number. So even if you summarize the phrase, summarize the source in your own words, you still have to cite the source. And then when you do your reference citation, notice how notice how your reference citation has to match your, here, this is the in-text citation, McRaven, and then when you do your reference citation, it should match. So you know you're doing it right if your in-text citation and your reference citation matches. So you have to have the author's name first, then the date, then you italicize the article name, then you write the name of the journal, and then this was obviously a book. So if you have a book, you don't need to put a web address. So then let's see. Here's another example of, you got to have a beginning quotation mark, an ending quotation mark, an author, and if you have more than one author, then you would use at al. Okay, so if your citation is more than one author, we write at al, and then we put comma and 2020. So this is an example of an in-text citation with, and these came from actual students. And so here is the reference citation. Liu, Liu, Liu. It must have been a family kind of thing. Here, look at how many authors. Liu, 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 Liu. A whole family worked on this one. And then one family friend, CC, somebody named CC. So then you have 2020, paper-based products as promising. And so here, I forgot to italicize this. Biosources is the name of the website and the journal, and then you have edition 15 and number 4, volume 15, edition 4, and these are the page numbers, 709.713, and then you can have sometimes you can do and then retrieved. This one's missing. Retrieved whatever the date from this database. And so that's basically, if you have done your week 10 credible sources worksheet, then all you have to do is just post this rough draft, and then you do your peer review to 2 student posts, and you're done for this week. So if other people are having trouble with their APA, feel free to help other students find sources, because for this essay 2, you are required to have at least one APA source and one APA in-text citation. And many students have trouble finding those sources. So in your week 11 forum, you can help other students or teach them how to find sources for their paper. And so week 11 is what we consider revision week, while week 12 is proofreading week. That is, in revision week, we check for essay structure, and in week 12, we check our paper for grammar. And then that's it, you're done. A couple of students are already done with their week 12. And so that is the last 2 weeks. Oh, I forgot. So the rewriting is the last stage of the writing process. And so when we do rewriting, first we check revision, first we check for essay structure. Then after we figure out that our essay structure is perfect, then we do our proofreading, where we check for grammar, punctuation, and APA. And then after that, you hand in your paper. And you can have someone you trust look over your paper. You can I don't think that you have smart thinking anymore. You could take a break from your paper by taking a walk. You could read your paper backwards. Have you ever read your paper backwards?
No.
Well, a lot of students swear by it. I don't know how. I've never tried reading my paper backwards. And also you could try out Grammarly. More and more students swear by Grammarly. Now, Grammarly started as just a small little program that corrected your grammar mistakes. Now that program has added AI, and now they do a lot more. So a lot more students are actually paying for the premier Grammarly and using that to check their grammar and tone as well. So, and of course, you could also schedule a Zoom session with me. We only have 1 more week left, and you get to have a brand new teacher. So here the revision. So here, when you look at the rough draft in the week 11, you look at people's papers and you see, you look at other people and you say, do you have a thesis statement? Does their thesis statement express the main idea of their paper? Do the 3 reasons in their thesis become their body paragraphs? Do the topic sentences of the body paragraph relate back to the thesis? Do they have an APA in-text citation? And did they place their thesis in the correct places? And so proofreading would be, do you have sentence variety? This is for next week. Did you place you and your with a did you replace you and your with a person and a person's? Did you avoid comma splices and fuse sentences? Are your paragraphs each 5 to 7 sentences long? Do you have correct APA formatting? Did you indent the first line of every paragraph, and did you use transition words? So that's what you'll look for in week 12, and then you hand it in, and the last day of this class is going to be, I believe this year it's Friday, March 31st. Last year it was Thursday, March 31st. So let's see, I think I can fix this to, that's right, this is not Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word, I can fix it. Okay, so that's basically it for this. And so the last day of this class is what? Yes?
Question, can I change my topic for this week instead of whatever I did for week 7 and week 8?
Oh yeah, you could do that, yeah. Why? What did you write for
Okay, making sure.
What did you write for week 7, week 8?
It was Star Trek versus Star Wars.
Oh, what do you want to change it to?
Gaming consoles to gaming PCs.
Oh, okay. So I guess you wanted a more challenging topic.
Yeah.
Okay. All
Hopefully
right.
it works out.
All right. So that way you get more writing practice, and
Yeah.
you get more writing practice, and you get to write something more challenging. Although Star Trek.
So, and I already started. I have already 3 paragraphs in, and it was better this time around than the first time around. For me, writing like 3 paragraphs came up pretty fast. Still not fast enough, but faster.
Yeah, the thing is, once you learn the 5-paragraph essay structure, each time you do it, it gets easier and easier and easier, and then writing becomes fun because you know what you're doing, rather than staring at a blank piece of paper and panicking. So let's do the science paper is not the same as a 5-paragraph essay paper. A science paper has a totally different structure. It's more similar to a problem solution paper. So when we went over problem solution and we did the second half in the how to write a persuasive essay, that's a science paper, is a problem solution. In other words, the first part of the science paper, you state the problem, and then the second part, you provide the solution, or you provide the proof of your solution. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by that. So first you would have a research question. So what is a science paper? In a science paper, you ask yourself a research question. You decide, what am I going to research? What do I want to know about? What do I want to prove with my experiment? So you start out with a research question of something you want to prove. And we use the scientific method. In other words, we make a claim, we find credible sources, then we create an experiment in which we prove our predictions. So the parts of a science paper are the title, the abstract. Abstract is usually written last. So the abstract is a summary of the entire paper. And so for me, I wrote the summary last. After I finished my entire science experiment, got all my results and all that kind of stuff, then the very last thing I did was my abstract. The abstract is what you read. When you go into the database and you see everyone's abstract, that's a summary of everybody's experiments. And you got to write that summary within 1 to 2 paragraphs, usually 1 paragraph. So that's before the first page of your paper is the abstract. Then the first page of your science paper is going to be the background and the purpose. Background meaning kind of like your introduction paragraph, where you're going to write, and purpose is like your thesis statement. So background would be climate change has been around for quite some time. I want to see what, I can't remember what it was that I did, but so background of the problem, then you're going to write about the purpose of your experiment. Methods is going to be, how did you conduct that experiment? What exactly did you do? Then results. After you conduct your experiment, then you tell the reader, well, the results of this experiment was 50% of the people, they liked Coca-Cola, well, the other 50%, whatever. Okay, so that's where you discuss the results. Conclusion is, how do you apply these results to the real world? Okay, so we figured out that 75% of people like Coca-Cola and only 15% like Pepsi. As a result, as a store owner, I'm going to place the Coca-Cola, which 75% of people like, in the front of the store, and then the Pepsi that everyone 15% only like, I'll put it at the back of the store. So conclusion is going to be how you apply the results in real life. And then references is obviously, and also in the conclusion, you also write down further research needs to be done in area A, B, C. In other words, what more can you research? What more can other people research on your topic? So that's why when you read a science paper, you want to read the conclusion. So that way, this will give you a clue as to what topics have not yet been done. And so if you're a graduate student still and your teacher says, now it's your turn to figure out a brand new topic for your graduate paper, and you haven't a clue, well, then you would skip to the last part, look at someone's conclusion, and somebody's going to say, well, we need to research this, this, and this. And you read a whole bunch of papers, and they all point to a particular area that needs researching, and that's where you start focusing your search for an original topic. Okay? So this will make sense after I go over all the different parts. So this is also similar to the different parts of a proposal, where we state the problem in the abstract, the background, and the purpose, and then we provide the solution in the methods, results, conclusion. Okay, so this is a problem solution paper, similar to a research proposal, similar to a business proposal. So let's get into it. So there are different kinds of science papers in the social sciences. In the social sciences, you have a case study where you give an overview. You present steps chronologically to present. In other words, for me, case studies would include my students. So if I'm writing a paper, I would say that Dorothy, my student, has trouble reading. So she needs extra help and extra tutoring. So I gave Dorothy her extra. So that's a case study where you actually, for you, it would be a patient. Donna is a patient and has such and such an illness. So case study, you would use case studies in order to illustrate your problem or illustrate a point. Literature review is when you summarize and you evaluate sources. So literature review is part of the background and purpose, some science papers actually has a separate part called literature review, where you list and give an annotated bibliography of everything that you've read. You might be thinking, but isn't that where references are for? No. References is what your paper was written on. Literature review is everything you read, and that includes sources you didn't even use in your paper. So that's the difference between a literature review and references. References are simply the stuff you did use, sources you did use for your paper. Literature review means everything you've ever read, whether you used it or not. And then you have policy or project analysis, where you analyze the topic, the history, and its effects. And so that's different kinds of analysis. And so I'll get into that in the next one. Then you have process description, which describes materials, steps in a process. In other words, a certain kind of paper where you tell people how to have a classroom with good discipline. Okay, that would be in my field. Organization. An organizational paper means that you state the topic and you give the steps. Okay, that's very similar to process analysis, where you state the problem and then you give the steps. Step 1, this is how you solve the problem. Step 2, so that's a problem solution paper. And then you have descriptions in a process, so the sentences are short. Then you have the lab or experiment report. So if you're conducting an experiment, you have to include clear data, logical analysis, results with data, and discussion results. And that would be like if you're doing a vaccine and you're doing trials for that vaccine, and you have to do all these trials, but then you have to include clear data in your results, and you present that to either other doctors, or you present that to other experts, or you present it to the public, that you're discussing what it is you're researching and what is your experiment report. And so when you do an experiment report, then you have to write in an objective tone. You use word choice, you're precise with technical terms, you use sentences with passive voice. When we write science papers, we're going to be using a lot of passive voice. We're not going to say Yvonne wrote the paper. We're going to say the experiment was done. Let me think. Surveys were taken. Chemical A, B, and C were used. In other words, it doesn't matter who did it. You're just listing what happened. So we use passive voice when the object is more important than the subject, and then the subject is receiving the action of. So basically, you're putting more importance into your methodology and less importance into who did it. When we write a book, or when we write a regular research paper, we are writing an active voice because it's important to know who the researcher was. But when we're doing an experiment, the focus is not on who did the experiment, the focus is on the experiment, therefore we use passive voice. So the subject of the sentence becomes not important, but the object of the sentence becomes important. And the object of your sentence is your actual experiment, not who did it, okay? So that's how we use passive voice in a science paper. Documentation, APA for social sciences, and then design formatted according to, what I mean by design is there are different kinds of science papers. Some science papers merge their results, discussion, and conclusion all in one chapter. Other disciplines have a different like 5 different sections just for methodology, 5 different sections just for discussion, 5 different sections just for conclusion. And so the exact design of a science paper will differ from professor to professor, from department to department. So that all depends on, you have to ask your professor for the exact formatting. And so and then you have a field report. A field report is when you go out into the field and conduct research. And so let's say I can't think of an example, but recently they had the New Palestine. Remember that something exploded on the train? And so now a field report would be if I have to go and test the water at New Palestine, and then I report from the field to the residents of New Palestine, your water is or is not contaminated by, what was the name of that railroad that did it, and anyway, that railroad has, so field report, you got to include clear data, unbiased reporting. You have to state the focus and issues, methods with procedure, results with data, and discussion results. And then you have your voice will be curious and meticulous. Your word choice will be using scientific and technical terms. Okay, that's if you're speaking to other experts. All of this is if you're speaking to other experts. If you're speaking to the general public, word choice would be, you're not going to be using scientific and technical terms. You're going to, I wouldn't say dumb it down, you're going to use ordinary language to tell people, how can I apply the results of your experiment to my daily life? So that would be, that's how come whenever we write something, we always have to take into account the audience of who we're writing for. So if you're going to do it to regular Joe, I think I would skip the scientific and technical term part. And we're going to use passive voice. Once again, if I'm talking to audience, if I'm talking to other experts, we use passive voice. If I'm going to be talking to the general public, you would use active voice, or you're going to put your audience to sleep. Design, graphs, tables, photos. Okay, that's, if you're going to have a lot of numbers, use a graph. Because if you state 20% of this, 50% of the 5% of the third percent of 6%, you're going to lose people. Are going to go, what? People like pictures. So when you have a lot of numbers that you have to report of your results, put it in a pie chart, and then people will go, oh, like that's what graphs, tables, and Canva, that's the name of the software. will become your friend. An info graph in which you put, that's also very popular. Instead of writing a field report or any kind of report for results, now people like putting it on colorful infograph using Canva. Because these days, people don't like to read. People like looking at pictures, more and more pictures. So that's how you would deal with the public. I'm not talking about other experts, but if you're going to do it to the average Joe, that's what I'm talking about. So how to achieve a scientific voice. Be factual, be concise, be objective. Use credible sources. Make sure your argument has ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos means that's the appeal to credibility. What's pathos again? You're still muted. Well, I still can't hear you. So I don't know why you're muted. Okay, now I can hear you. So what's pathos?
Pathos is, what's the right word? Is concise. Let me. Oh, does it apply to emotion?
Yeah, appeal to emotion. Are we going to have a lot of emotion in a scientific paper?
No.
No. So we want to be neutral and objective. So pathos would probably be absent, but you're going to have a lot of, in a science paper, you're going to have a lot of ethos and logos. In other words, you're going to use a lot of experts, and you're going to have logic, as in everything is a certain structure. Okay, and you're going to use third-person case for the most part. You're not going to say, I conducted the experiment, because nobody cares about your opinion, about your personal life, or I. Everybody's more interested in the experiment. That's the difference in science papers. The focus is on the experiment and not on the person, hence the third-person case. And so be objective in your science paper. Avoid using second-person case, first-person case. Use third-person case. Use passive voice. Yes, passive voice is okay for science papers. Engage the opposition to avoid bias and fallacies. That means that you could write a counter-argument paragraph and a rebuttal paragraph if you're writing a review. See how biased the media has become in the... So we want to, if we're writing an argumentative paper, then we would use a counter-argument and a rebuttal paragraph to avoid being biased like this, like we did in week 10, I think, is what we did. So tips for a scientific voice. Develop a precise vocabulary. Read the literature to become fluent, or at least familiar with the sort of language that is standard to describe what you're trying to describe. Be as precise as possible. Limit your language. Once you've labeled an activity or a condition or a period of time, use that label consistently throughout the paper. Consistency is more important than creativity. Define your terms and your assumptions. And then be honest about the limitations of your knowledge or your research. Give the reader enough information to come to the same conclusions as you did. Include all the information the reader needs to interpret your data. Remember, the key to all scientific discourse is that it is reproducible. Have you presented enough information so that the reader could reproduce your experiment, your research, or your investigation? Because if somebody else cannot reproduce your results, then your experiment results are not valid. So when describing an activity, break it down into elements that can be described and labeled, and then present them in the order they occurred. So that this is why when you write the methodology section of your science paper, you have to be extremely precise. And that is where most people spend the most time, is on methodology. Because if you can't get that right and somebody else tries to replicate your experiment and cannot, then your whole reputation as a scientist out the window. Okay, so everyone's got to be able to come up with your results. When you use numbers, use them effectively. Don't present them so they don't use graphs. Don't present them so they cause more work for the reader. Include details before conclusions, but only include those details you have been able to observe by the methods you have described. Do not include your feelings, your attitudes, your impressions, or opinions. You save that for the creative writing class. Research your format and citations. Do these match what have been used in current relevant journals? Run a spell check and proofread carefully. Read your paper out loud and have a friend look over. And this came from CSU 2022. How to plan your research. How to plan your research paper is very similar to pre-writing. You storyboard your idea. You figure out what it is you want to research. You make a vision statement, and then you develop a research question. And then the answer to this research question becomes the topic of your science paper. And then class discussion. So how do we maintain a scientific voice?
By using a passive tone?
Yeah, and then do we put our political stance? Do we put
No.
do we try to put our personal opinions into it, or do we base it on the results of our experiment?
Result.
The results. What are the different kinds of science papers that exist?
Oh. Can you write those down? Yeah, no, I didn't write those down. Sorry.
You've got case study, you've got lab report, you've got field report. So case study is you're studying people like psychiatrists, teachers, and nurses. A lab report, that's more like what a scientist does when he reports the results of his experiment. Field report means you go outside and you actually do your experiment. You see, a lab report, you do it inside a laboratory. So that's your experiment is indoors, and then the field report is outdoors. So that's with the New Palestine, and you got to go outside and test the water. So field report. So those are the different kinds of science papers that you can have. What is a research question? So the research question, the objective or hypothesis of the study, helps to set up the context for what you have researched and why you chose to study this particular topic. Therefore, it is included in the introduction of the manuscript. You always start your paper with a research question as the reason why you are doing the study. In other words, what is it you want to study? So you always have to figure out what is it that you're researching. Now, sometimes the research question is given to you by your company. If you happen to work for a company and your boss says, you are going to research this. You're going to make sure that the water in New Palestine is not contaminated. So it's your job. So sometimes the research question is given to you by your boss. Other times it's given to you by your professor. And if you're lucky, you get to come up with it by yourself. That's actually quite the luxury to do it by yourself. The importance of research questions. The research question sets up what you will be studying. What are you interested in? What needs further studying? What hypothesis do you want to prove or disprove? So basically, you have a hypothesis, and then your experiment will prove or disprove that hypothesis. So let's say you have the vaccine for disease A is or is not effective. So then you have to do your experiment to prove whether or not that vaccine is effective or not effective, or whether it's safe or not safe for the general public. So your research question would be, is the COVID vaccine safe for the general public? Or is the COVID vaccine effective for the general public? Or does it have side effects? Or is whatever Ebola vaccine or whatever vaccine you're working on? So that's a very common, so when you create a hypothesis, so your hypothesis would be, my vaccine or the COVID vaccine is effective. Now you got to go prove it. Okay? If you're going to make a hypothesis, you got to go out and prove to the general public that it's effective. So that's your hypothesis. It's kind of like a thesis statement where you make a claim and then you've got to prove it. And that's where the experiment comes in. That's known as the scientific method. So the very heart of science is to find evidence for the claim you are making. Science is the process by which you prove your claim to the world through observation, tests, and results. When you create a science experiment, you want answers and credible results to your research question. The experiment is the means by which you create the evidence through the results of your experiment. You either affirm your claim or disaffirm your claim, and it takes time to gather data. And here's the important part of science. The results of the data changes over time. So if at one point I would say, no, you don't have to wear masks for COVID-19. So that means that at that point in time, all the science data said it's not effective. Then at a later time, someone else did a lot of study and decided, oh, well, you know what? It turns out that masking is effective. So when a scientist seems to flip-flop like that, it's not because he's flip-flopping or doesn't know what he's saying. It's because the scientist, it takes time to gather data. And in the time, between the time that let's say it's November of 2022, he says masking is not effective. Then by March of 2020, he goes, oh, but then I found out later, it is effective. Well, that's because during that time period, a lot of scientists did a lot of study and came up with, yes, we did other studies, and then we concluded that masking is actually effective. Yeah, that sort of thing. So it's not somebody flip-flopping, and in science, it's not written in stone. Just because you say one thing, it can change over time. Does that make sense?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say the person who said that because he was accused of lying, but that's because people think you say one thing, and therefore if you change your mind, then that means you're flip-flopping and you're lying. Well, that's when you talk about Joan is a good worker, and then you change your mind. Oh, well, Joan's really not a good worker, or something like that. That kind of flip-flopping shows a weakness in character. But science is simply that the data changes based on all the different, So when your results might say one thing, then later on, as they do more experiments and you find out more data, it changes. So the scientific method is defined as a method of research in which a problem is identified, relevant data is gathered, a hypothesis is formulated from this data, and the hypothesis is empirically tested. In simple terms, the scientific method is a way for scientists to study and learn things. Science focuses on measured observation aimed at understanding a topic or research problem. Experiments are set up to test the hypothesis about why things happen. So the hypothesis was masks are effective to prevent COVID-19. Now you've got to go prove it, okay, in many different experiments. And so at first they didn't really know. So experiential results will either approve or disapprove a hypothesis. So that's part of science. It's not written in stone. Only ignorant people think if you say one thing, then that's the way it is forever. And so, oh my God, and the media uses that to manipulate public opinion. Once you become a scientist and you realize that the whole nature of science is always something changing, then you're like, oh, then you understand better. So that's why I want to develop in my students critical thinking skills. So you don't believe everything that you hear on television and definitely not social media. So a hypothesis is a testable theory. See, you got to test it. It's not something that's written in stone because you got to keep testing it. You conduct an experiment to see if it's true or false. It could be either way, and it could be this different within 2 or 3 weeks of each other. That doesn't mean that the person is flip-flopping. Your hypothesis is like a working thesis statement for a paper where you change, just like you're changing your topic from Star Trek to something else because you want to write something better. So steps of the scientific method: ask a question, make an observation, create a hypothesis, make a prediction based on the hypothesis, test the prediction of the, so that was the part that they had to test the prediction. I predict that masking is effective. Now I've got to test it to figure out if that's true. Then you use the results to make a new hypothesis. So if eventually, originally he said masking is not effective. Then he did all these tests, and then he used the results to make a new hypothesis. Oh, I just realized now, based on the testing, masking is effective for COVID-19 transmission. So yes, we make new hypotheses and new predictions based on the data that we receive from our studies. And so what makes a good scientific paper? The author should write a paper in a way that makes a great impact on its readers, such as writing an article that describes the major finding of the article and writing the article in a language that is as clear as possible. And you want to avoid clunky, well, that's another, okay. So what is the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research? Do you know already?
Mhm.
What is qualitative versus quantitative research?
Qualitative, that doesn't involve numbers. Quantitative, you have numbers or facts or yeah.
Right. So qualitative research involves analyzing anything that has no numbers. So usually that's like an anthropologist. So if I'm an anthropologist and I'm Margaret Mead and I go off and look at the chimpanzees, I'm going to describe in my qualitative research how those chimpanzees react and act in their society. And I realized, wow, we act like chimpanzees. That was Margaret Mead's, So grounded theory involves collecting data in order to develop new theories. In other words, human society seems just like ape society. That brings us down a notch, doesn't it? For people with such high egos of themselves. Ethnography involves immersing yourself in a group or organization to understand. So in the old days, before internet and TV and radio, there used to be isolated cultures where people were so isolated from each other. You could go as an anthropologist and you could study these cultures that are so different from Western culture. Now with internet, I remember when I was in college, I went to an anthropology class, and even at that time, my anthropology teacher was complaining that all the cultures were now the same. There's nothing to study anymore. Everybody's eating McDonald's. How interesting, how boring is that? She was complaining about. And now at the internet, there is nothing that's different. So you want something, so ethnography is when you insert yourself into a totally different environment. Think National Geographic, okay? All of those articles are written mainly by ethnographers who inserted, and the earlier in time you go, the more you can find something interesting to study. The later in time, all you get is McDonald's and internet, which is not interesting. Different kinds of qualitative research means narrative research, which means involving interpreting stories to understand how people make sense of their experience and perceptions. And so the Library of Congress has a file of people's lived experiences. So studying people's biography to study history is an example of qualitative research. Phenomenological research involves investigating phenomenon through people's lived experiences. Studying the near-death experience of different people in different cultures is an example of phenomenological research. Action research links theory and practice in several cycles to drive innovative changes. And then quantitative research, like you said, is numbers. And usually when I wrote my paper, most people or scientists combine quantitative and qualitative research together. So when I'm stating the purpose of or background of my paper, I'm usually doing qualitative research. Then when I start doing my results, I'm doing quantitative research. So usually quantitative research means your numerical data means collecting and analyzing numerical data to describe characteristics, find correlations, or test hypotheses. So let's say I did my experiment. Now I've got to infer and I've got to make hypotheses based on my numbers, how I'm going to apply my results to the real world. So if I say 85% of people who took the vaccine show no side effects and now have strong antibodies for that disease, then I would say, and it's 85% effective, then in my conclusion I would say, okay, you guys can now implement that vaccine to the general public without worrying about side effects. Okay, so and then what is our methodology? How do we do our experiments? Survey research. We can conduct a survey. How many people, what percentage of people, we could take a poll. We do an experiment. There are many different ways to conduct your quantitative research. But the survey research is the most elementary tool for all sorts of quantitative research techniques. Think Survey Monkey. Oh, it's not Survey Money. Survey Monkey as a way for researchers to take surveys through this, Descriptive research seeks to explain the current status of an identified variable. The aim of descriptive research is to explain and interpret the current status. Oh, that's just, all that means is that you look at your numbers and then you describe what those numbers mean. Because if you just lay out the numbers, people are going to go, what? And then you have to interpret, oh, well, that just means this, this, and this. And that means that I affirm my original prediction was correct when I said blah, 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 blah. So this has all got to do, descriptive research means that you describe the implications of your results. Experimental research is usually based on one or more theories. It is based on one or more than one theory. It is called experimentation, and it uses the scientific method to establish the cause and effect relationship among a group of variables that make up a study. Multiple theories can be used to conduct this research. The components of experimental research design are prescribed below. So here you could have multiple theories, like some people think that this vaccine is totally irrelevant and ineffective, but other people think, well, it might be effective, but only for a certain group of people. But other groups of people who are old or young may not be so, whatever. So when you have many different facets of one topic, and you have to conduct an experiment in order to prove or disprove the many different facets of what works and what doesn't work, that's known as experimental research. That's why it takes so long. It took such a long time for them to approve all the different vaccines, because you have to do so much research to make sure it's safe. And in order to make sure something is safe, like a vaccine, you can't just vaccinate just you and your grandmother. You have to vaccinate a large sampling of people across many different countries, ethnicities, different kinds of people. You don't just vaccinate and experiment on just women. You have black women, Asian women, white women, Hispanic women, old, young. So the bigger the sampling, the more valid your results. So sampling means selecting the group. You will actually collect data from your research. For example, you are researching the opinions of students in your university. You could survey a sample of at least 100 students. And then the more you sample, the more valid your results. So if a experiment has small sampling, then you know that the results of that experiment may not be valid. Whereas if someone said, but I sampled the whole world, or every country on every continent, and I got these results, then you would know this is one way to know whether somebody's study is valid or not, is sampling. So the size of our sample dictates the amount of information we have, therefore determines our precision or level of confidence that we have in our results. So the more we sample, that way, let's say for the vaccine, I would say, well, I'm a Hispanic woman. How do you know your vaccine is going to work on me? Oh, well, I'm Asian man. How do you know it's going to work on me if all you did was a bunch of sampling only, say, white males or white females? So that's why you want to sample as much as you can. So I just went over that. So that's what this one was, the importance of sampling. So so sampling is one way in which we tell that an experiment is valid. Another one is the experiment replicable? So one of the most important features of scientific research paper is that whatever you did has to be replicable among other people. So if I just said in the United States, this vaccine is effective, well, then in England, they have to do the same experiment and then have the same results. Oh, it's effective in England. It's effective in France. It's effective everywhere. In other words, every group of people that conducts your experiment comes up with the same results, that the vaccine is effective and safe. Then that means that your results are valid. So your experiment needs to be replicable, which means that it keeps researchers honest and it gives readers confidence in research. And then class discussion. So what is a research question?
What is a research question? Whatever you plan on, figure like the problem. It's a problem. The problem you want to
Yeah, they had
That
a lot
part.
of problems with COVID-19, didn't they? They had to prove
Yeah.
every little thing. Is social distancing effective at avoiding transmission, or masking, or is it washing your hands? And then they figured, oh, it's got to be a combination of all three. They couldn't figure out which one was the most effective factor, so they just threw everything in and decided, let's do all three just to be on the safe side. What is the difference between qualitative and quantitative research? We did that already. Why is
Yeah.
sampling so important to research?
It's important. I mean, whenever we say sampling, we're talking about surveyors, right? Like how many people we're gonna.
Yes. How many people?
Yeah. So that yeah, depend like the bigger it is the more it can be more accurate the bigger the sample is or samples are.
Yes. The more, so when I did my research paper, I had to look at hundreds and thousands of instances. I didn't just do one or two or 10. And the more books I read and the more sampling I did, the more the professor was going, okay, now I approve. I remember thinking I remember doing some, but he always wanted more and more and more and more. I didn't understand why. So why is replication so important to the validity of a study?
I mean, because it needs to be. I mean, because it needs to be valid. Like if you can't replicate it somewhere else in another country in the same settings, they might have been something somebody missed wrote or something that missed something.
Right.
But if it's not, if you, somebody does all the instructions and they can't get the same results, the paper's wrong.
Right.
Somebody.
Right. So in a science paper, being accurate is and being accurate and getting the exact, like being able to replicate someone else's experiment is very important. So that's how we know that a experiment is valid. So what are the parts of a science paper? And so I just went over title, abstract, background and purposes, literature review, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, references, tables, figures, and appendices. And so we haven't gone over so much tables is when you have
Yeah.
all these are the two tables and figures. Figures is when you use more like pictures. Tables is like graphs, when you use a pie chart, when you use the different charts. And then appendices means that you're going to put all of this after. The appendices always occurs after your references. In other words, you can't, if you have 50 pictures, but you can only fit 30 of them into your paper, then the extra 20 pictures that you couldn't fit into your paper goes into your appendices. Do you understand? Because you can only fit so many pictures and graphs. Otherwise, it interrupts the flow of whatever you're saying. And so if you're still hell-bent on your reader wanting to know even more about your topic, then you put it into your appendices, all the extra stuff, okay? Because people only have so much time to read your stuff. And so that's why if people are really interested, then they go to the back of the book. And you save the front of the book for the important stuff. So we've gone over. So what's an abstract? Title is the title page. That's pretty obvious. What is an abstract?
It's where you propose the question, your hypothesis.
Okay. And what do you do with the what do you do in the abstract?
You state your problem.
No, that's down here. That's background and purpose. So the abstract comes before stating the problem.
Oh. Because I thought you put the abstract then after conclusions too.
No, you put the summary first. The abstract is the summary. So when you look at the database at the online library, you're actually reading the abstract. In other words, that comes before the first page of a paper. So it's kind of like when you read a book and you look at a book cover and you see a little summary of the story on the book cover. Sometimes it's on the back of the book, the summary of a story. You want to decide, should I buy this book or not? So a lot of people would go to the back of the book, read the summary and go, that story sounds really interesting. I think I'm going to buy this book. Well, that's what the abstract is. The abstract is kind of like that summary for the book on the back of the book. Just like you would read the abstract and decide, I think I'm going to use this article for my paper. It's the same idea. That's what the abstract's for. And what's the background and purpose?
Okay, so that's where the problem hypothesis is at.
And what is the difference between background and purpose?
Oh, purpose is the reason you're doing the.
Yeah, it's like a
your-
thesis statement. Yeah. In other words, what is the hypothesis are you trying to prove? That's where you state the hypothesis. What is a literature review?
Literature review. Guess references is that one. Literature review was. Give me a second. I know. It was. Everything that you read.
Yes.
Everything that you read, encompassing your
Everything.
studies.
Even if you didn't use it in the paper or anything. Yeah. What about methods?
The research methods that you chose or choosing, like survey or.
Right. That's actually the heart of whatever it is you're doing. Results. And what about discussion?
Discussions.
Now, in some science papers, the discussion and the conclusion are combined together as one chapter. But some people make it so discussion. The difference is that in discussion, you talk about the real world implications of whatever your results are. And conclusion is where you discuss, in the future, we also need to research A, B, and C. Okay? So some people like to separate that. And they separate the discussion of interpretation of results, and to conclusion is what else needs to be researched about your topic. What other books should be read, that sort of thing. Some people combine it, some people don't. So that pretty much is, so here I go over the parts of it. What an abstract is, the title briefly states what the article is about. The abstract summarizes the whole article. The introduction establishes the context for the research, the area in which the research takes place, the research problem, the importance of the research, and the guiding question or hypothesis. Then in results, materials and methods, you describe your research method, you report, then in results, you report the outcome of your research procedure. Discussion, you interpret the results, explaining them and comparing them to the results of other experiments. And then conclusion focuses the reader on what is important about this research, its contribution to the larger area of research, and what other research needs to be done. And then you have your references. So the title includes the main variables, the setting, the design, the experiment. The title should capture the essence of the paper. If someone was interested in your topic, what phrase or keywords would they type into a search engine? Make sure those words are included in your title. So a title could be renal disease susceptibility, can't even say that word, and hypertension are under independent genetic control in the fawn-hooded rat. Territory size in Lincoln sparrows. Replacement of deciduous first premolars and dental eruption in whales. The radio frequency in an electron transistor. Okay, so that's an abstract is 1 or 2 paragraphs that summarize the whole experiment. When you go to a database, you are reading an abstract. The abstract is the elevator pitch for your article. Most abstracts are 150 to 300 words, which translates to approximately 10 to 20 sentences. Like any good pitch, it should describe the importance of the field, the challenges that your research addresses, and how your research solves the challenge, and its potential future impact. So here you have generally between 50 to 100, you should list the parameters of your study, sample size, specific species. Think of the process of your writing. I'll give you some examples so you'll understand all of this. So basically you write everything that you did down in like one paragraph. This is why I did my abstract last, okay? Because I had to finish my experiment to see what my results were before I could write down what those results were. Oh, did you want to read that?
No, I can read it later.
Okay. In the background and purpose, the researcher talks about why the research topic is important. The researcher builds a convincing argument for the merit of his research problem. He indicates the scope of research and can include a research literature review. So you open with one sentence to set the context of the problem. You follow with a description or history of the problem. You address gaps in existing knowledge, and you state what information in your article will address, or in other words, you state your purpose. And then you give a description, and then you give a purpose. So these are all descriptions and purposes of other people's research papers. Then you have your context. So this is part of the background of your, think like the 5 background sentences in your introduction, okay? And this also is kind of like the 5, this is what you would write with the 5 background sentences in your introduction, similar to that in your 5-paragraph essay. Then you state the thesis statement, which is the last sentence, just like you do in your essay. It is the last sentence of the first paragraph. Then you state your hypothesis, or you state the thesis statement. In this report, we summarize our analysis of genomic DNA extracted from lyophilized whole blood. Okay, so this was somebody's experiment, obviously a doctor. Literature review. The scientist reads many articles about, usually the literature review is for the professor, so that the professor can see that you've read all of these articles, basically. And because in the literature review, you also have to do an annotated bibliography where you not only list the articles, you summarize each article as well. So I think I had like 100 articles in my literature review, each of them summarized. So it's basically, at least for a graduate student, it's for the professor to know you've mastered the material. At least that's what it was for me. So another name for literature review is annotated bibliography. And so an annotated bibliography is simply a list of references with a summary for each article, so you can keep track of your research. All right, now we're done with stating the problem. All of that first half of the science paper was all about stating what the problem is and all your reading material. Now we're getting to solution. So the solution here, we're going to prove our claim. This is methodology. This is the heart of it. In this section, you describe how you performed your study. You need to provide enough information for the reader to duplicate your experiment. However, be reasonable about who the reader is. Assume he or she is familiar with basic practices of your field. It's helpful to both writer and reader to organize this section chronologically. That is, describe each procedure in the order it was performed. For example, DNA extraction, purification, amplification, assay, detection, or study area, study population, sampling technique, variables included, analysis method. Include in this section study design, procedures which should be listed and described, particular techniques, modifications of techniques, specialized equipment, description of the population, assumptions of the study, statistical methods, including software programs. Methods. In the methods section, the researcher describes the research, its design, its theoretical framework, sample, key variables, instruments used to collect data, and data analysis. Of all the sections, the methods section is simultaneously the easiest and most important section to write accurately. Any results in your paper should be replicable based on the methods section. So if you've developed an entirely new experimental method, write it out in excruciating detail, including setup, control, and protocols, also manufacturers and part numbers of what you used, if appropriate. But if you're building upon a previous study, there's no need to repeat all of these details. That's what references are for. Methods and material. So then in the methods chapter, it gets broken down into materials, procedures, that sort of thing. So the methods chapter, this is an actual chapter in somebody's paper. So the first part of that chapter would be tell what materials you used in your experiment. Tell exactly what you did. So then the second heading, after you have materials, and I remember writing video. I used 5 or 6 videos and books and transcripts. Tell exactly what you did. And I compared the different videos of the native native speakers and non-native speakers. This is such a long time ago. So that was procedure. And so here are some examples of what people did. Frogs were monitored using encounter transects. Of course, I don't know what that means. And methods and materials description. Here's more of what people did. When you read this, do you understand it because of your medical background?
A little bit, not everything.
Oh, okay. So it's more than what I know, okay? Because you're supposed to study this, and eventually you're supposed to know what that means, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So that's why they call you the doctor someday. Statistical analysis procedure. Also, what kind of statistics you gathered? How did you get your results? How did you get your numbers? Where did those numbers come from? It's kind of like when you did algebra and you had to show your equation, your math equation, how you proved it to the professor. You don't just write out the answer. So that's your statistical. I remember having, my professor had to help me with the numbers. My strength was in description and linguistics, but not in fractions and all that kind of stuff and percentages. He had to help me out on that one. Anyway, now that we're done with methods, okay, now we know how the experiment was done, we're now in results. So what were your results? So the results section lists the key findings of the experiment. Key findings and its implications are focused in this section. If your study was quantitative, then list those percentages. Avoid making vague statements like some people like Pepsi, while other people like Coca-Cola. That's not good. You got to say 75% like Coca-Cola, while only 25% like Pepsi. And so the guy knew to put his that was the whole purpose. This guy has a very small store. So he hired a marketing people. He goes, okay, what should I put at the front of my store? What should I put at the back of my store? So the marketing people did a series of surveys of the different stuff that this guy was selling. And so when he found out that he had a list of all the things people really, really liked, he put all that junk in the front of the store, and all the junk that people really, really did not like, he put all that junk at the back of the store. That's how he, used the result. That his store is so small, so he doesn't have the room to just stick everything everywhere like in a grocery store. But everybody does that. I think there's a word for that. I forgot. In marketing, is when you place things in a specific. I forgot that. Anyway, so results. This section presents the facts. What was found in the course of this investigation? Detailed data, measurements, counts, percentages, patterns usually appear in tables, figures, and graphs. And the text of this section draws attention to the key data and relationships among data. 3 rules of thumb will help you with this section. Present results clearly and logically. Avoid excess talking. Consider providing a 1-sentence summary at the beginning of each paragraph. It will help your reader understand your data. Remember to use tables and figures effectively, and don't expect them to just stand alone. Result examples. I'm not gonna do that. Tips for describing tables and graphs. You can read this later. And now we're done with results. In the discussion section, you discuss the real-world implications of your experiment. Here's some more examples. We went over that. And in the conclusion, you talk about what more research needs to be done. And that's this one. Summarize everything you have already written. Emphasize the most important findings from your study. Restate why they matter. State what you learned and end with the most important thing you want the reader to take away from the paper. That sounds just like the summary conclusion of your 5-paragraph essay. Your vision statement. From the conclusion, a reader should be able to understand the gist of your whole study, including your results and their significance. References. Now, of course, that's self-explanatory. So that's at the end. Create a list of tables for all your graphs and pie charts, and then for all your pictures. Okay, then you have your figures, and your appendices is all the other junk that you couldn't fit anywhere else. Okay, especially if it's really detailed. So here are the different steps in writing. You got the vision statement, storyboarding, methods, results, conclusion, discussion, background and purpose, introduction, literature review, and abstract, and I did that last. I remember it was a month before everything was due, that April, before graduating, and everything was. So what are the different parts of a science paper?
You got your title, your abstract, your background, summary. You got your background, purpose, methods, results, discussion, conclusion, results.
No, you already said results. You got it. You got references.
Literature.
Yes. And reference.
Yeah.
And knowing the parts of a science paper will help you read other people's science papers. Then you'll understand what it is when someone writes in methodology. You know exactly that. You know. Then you'll think, oh, this is how that guy did his experiment. Results. Ooh, that's the results, and so on and so on. In other words, when you read the heading, you know what they're talking about. Here's an easy example. And by the way, I think I made this up off the top of my head. Vision statement and research question. Which product is better, Coke or Pepsi? That's the thing. Part of teaching, if you go into teaching, you're going to have to make difficult data easier for your students. So that's part of teaching. So this is what I did. So the background and purpose. A small store in Texas wants to know which drink that they can put to the front of the store as they have limited shelf space. So they hired a marketing company to ask a random sampling of local people which drink they like best, Coke or Pepsi. And then that's the background, methods. So that means how they conducted. They surveyed 100 people. That was the methods. The results, most people like Coke. They don't like Pepsi. And so as the discussion and conclusion, well, the store owner placed all the Pepsi at the back of the store and the Coke in the front of the store. See, I just made that up off the top of my head. So here is my thesis of what I did. The use of scripted and non-scripted video in foreign language teaching. This was my UCLA MA thesis in ESL and applied linguistics. So my abstract, the present study investigates the role of non-scripted and scripted video in language learning. Studying the characteristics of these two types of videos will shed light on which of these kinds of videos are more useful and more effective to teach a foreign language. Non-scripted video provides the language learner with a more vernacular, informal register of speech. It provides dialogue not written by a teacher. It is a recording of actual speech between two native speakers of that language. Scripted video exposes students to a more formal register. It features dialogue written by teachers using simplified sentences. Usually these are the material found in a grammar book. So scripted video is when you make video based on a grammar book, so that teachers write the conversations, and it's all in the grammar book. Non-scripted video is if I were to just go outside and take pictures of anybody in a bakery. Like if you go to a bakery and talk to the baker, and I'm recording you talking. Then I show it to my students. Let's say I go to France or China, and I show the video of you and your baker talking, and I would say to my Chinese students, this is how Americans interact in a bakery. So that would be non-scripted video because nobody told you what to say. So basically, in a non-scripted video, you'd get to hear people say the F word. You're going to get, when people get frustrated, they're going to, the finger and all that kind of stuff. Whereas in scripted video, where the teachers wrote the videos for the students, you're not going to have your students, well, that's why students always want to learn curse words, because you never can find that kind of stuff in a grammar book. So I will be comparing and contrasting a scripted French video with a non-scripted French video. And which is easier for students to learn a foreign language? Is it easier for students to learn a foreign, this is my research question, is it easier for my students to learn a foreign language by just watching television, for instance? You watch native speakers just off the top of their head talking, or is it easier for a language learner to learn a language by studying their grammar book? Okay, so that was my research question. And by the way, this whole thing has been simplified. Okay, my real abstract was had way more stuff. So I even simplified the simplified. But anyway, so that's part of what you're going to do if you're going to write for medical stuff for the general public. You're not going to use all that vernacular. Remember all those examples we had earlier? That's the actual research paper that people read and go, what? And then you have to translate. Anyway, so identifying the differences in these videos through content analysis will enable the teacher to know when to use scripted video and when to use non-scripted video. This is more what I wrote, yeah. The content analysis consisted of studying the frequency, the distribution, the functions of the grammatical structures, negation, verb form, pronoun, social structure, and interactional strategies, turn-taking, insertions, hesitations, and self-repair. The data from this analysis reveals a simplified grammatical and interactional structure in grammar books suitable for low-level students, and a more complex and vernacular grammar and interactional structure suitable for more advanced students. By the way, this is also somewhat simplified. So it actually, I also had analysis, inferences, and a lot of more statistics in my original. This is a little closer to what I wrote, but it's still, it gives you a flavor of what I did. But basically, it's just the abstract. And it's in the UCLA library, my MA thesis, so for anybody to take out. So, so this is my abstract. It took me like 2 weeks. So here I'm getting into my context and background. And this is simplified. Over the past few decades, the use of video and multimedia is being used to teach students many languages like French, Spanish, or Chinese. Video provides the student a window into another culture. It is this visual aspect of video which gives it an advantage over learning language from text. Context and background. So now I'm moving on to video provides the foreign language learner a window into another culture, allowing the student to see body gestures, oral gestures, cultural clues. It is this visual aspect which gives video and other multimedia such as the internet its advantage over traditional textbook learning of a foreign language. There are two kinds of videos or multimedia content for language learners: authentic or non-scripted video, or scripted video. So authentic or non-scripted video includes TV documentaries, streaming movies, radio broadcasts, live interviews, and unmonitored conversation. If I'm writing this, if I'm giving this presentation to other teachers, do I need to define what an authentic video is to other teachers? Or do they already know this because they're doing it, they're saying?
Depends, I think.
Depends on your audience.
I want to go with no.
Yes, that's correct. If this was, I'm defining all of this because I know that if I don't, and I just say authentic, non-scripted video, this is what my students look like. Huh? What? You know, like blank, the blank look, glazed. So I have to say, if you're learning the language by watching, like right now, I'm learning Chinese by watching a Chinese sci-fi movie, okay? So that's authentic. And then if I were to pick up a grammar book, then that would be scripted, okay? So because somebody wrote a script. So another kind of video is scripted video or scripted multimedia content, which is useful for students because it provides simple, modified, comprehensible input that is similar to teacher talk, necessary for low-level students. So scripted video is useful for foreign students because it provides simpler language material for low-level students. By the way, I would never have said all of this for another teacher, because if you're already teaching, you should already know this because you confront low-level students every day at work. Okay, that's like me defining to you what's a patient. Okay, if I were to say, do you know that a patient is somebody that goes to a hospital? You'd be like, well, I'm a nurse. You would think I'd know that. So all of this context, I had to add in extra because I know my students are going to go, what's a comprehensible input? What's that? So yeah, so I did. So whenever you write anything, you got to be always aware of your audience. That's what this proves. Be aware of your audience. So So basically, after I did my research, forget it. So non-scripted video exposes the more advanced students to unmodified, informal, native speaker speech. In other words, you get to learn all the slang, all the curse words. And then the limitations of this study. Okay, so you then have to write, what are the limitations of the study? Because the target language is French, The variables used may be generalizable to students, may not be generalizable to students learning other foreign languages. This study came from secondary data and not from primary sources such as recordings. In other words, I used other people's recordings. I didn't make the recording myself. Editing may have occurred to save TV airtime. Once again, somebody could have edited. If I created the video, then that's considered a primary source. It's a lot more authentic for the research. But since I'm not in France, I had to use secondary sources. Since the subjects were aware they were being recorded, this awareness may have contaminated the data. And both scripted and non-scripted videos were made for different audiences. The non-scripted videos came from TV shows, and the scripted video came from somebody's grammar book. So that's what I did. I compared which is better, to learn foreign language from a grammar book or learn foreign language from watching TV. Which do you think is better, watching TV or a grammar book?
I'm biased. Me and my sister kind of learn English by TV.
That's how my mother learned. My mother learned English by going to the movies and watching, because they didn't have TV in my mother's day. This was 1950. Only rich people had TVs. So the ordinary Joe still had to go to the theater to watch the movies. So she was the ordinary Joe teenager at the time, and that's why she knew all of the movies. Just like Star Trek people, you just say one sentence and they can, know the whole dialogue. Well, that was my mother. Movies from 1950 to 1980 within a 30-year time span, and you could just say one, and she would just know the rest of it, because that's how she learned English, partially. And then, the purpose of this study is to uncover the usefulness of scripted and non-scripted video in foreign language learning. So my research questions: what are the differences in linguistic input found in both kinds of videos, and how would these differences be used to teach French? So is it better to teach French having everybody watch TV or having them to learn grammar? And so this is more context about it, and this is more comprehensible and all that kind of stuff. And so then I talk about, basic linguistic theory, and then I talk about then class discussion. So what is my study about?
Your study was what's the right term?
The best way to learn a foreign language.
It was
TV or a grammar book. You can skip all the scripted and unscripted, because
that's what I was trying to get to.
You're not going to remember that. But what's important to remember is it easier to do TV or grammar book? These days, not just TV, streaming movies on internet also qualifies as like TV, because you're listening to native speakers talking in their environment. And for me, I'm learning Chinese again, and I find that if you're this is the results, so I'm going to skip over all that. So the results of my research was, I found that at my level, I'm a high advanced level of speaker of Chinese, but I've forgotten a lot of my Chinese, you see. So for me, watching the movie is very, very like a good way for me to remember all of my Chinese. For you, learning Chinese, would it be from a movie or from a grammar book? You're a lower level.
That's what I'm trying to figure out, because I want to travel and go to places, and I don't know if because I was young and I had TV and I had my parents speaking to me in Spanish. It was easier for me to my brain to process both, and now I can speak both pretty equally good. But I don't know how as an adult learner.
No, it's for a language you have no knowledge about. Spanish, you already had some knowledge, so you were already an advanced speaker. Therefore, watching television helped. Just like I'm an advanced speaker of Chinese. I'm talking about a language you have know nothing about, like Chinese.
Yeah.
Would it be better?
I'm gonna go with from the book.
Yes.
From grammar.
That was the results. If it's a language you have absolutely no knowledge about, like Russian or Chinese, Japanese, then studying for low level students, studying from the book first. Then once you learn some of it, you become intermediate to advanced, like I was. I just simply forgot my Chinese. Then it's better to learn from television. Those were the results of my, of what I did. And so I just told you 3 different sections: results, results, conclusion, no, results, discussion, and conclusion. So that pretty much, the methods, this is what I did. What I did was I compared, I looked at the transcripts of a non-scripted video. I looked at the transcript of a scripted video. So in the non-scripted video, you have people going, oh, I want that one. No, wait, I want that one. No, I want this one. Oh, shh. And, the bad word, and then another bad word. Oh, yeah, maybe I want this one. That sort of thing. So you've got a lot of and ha, but you get to hear how people actually sound. In French, they don't say ha, they go ba, ba, for instance. So you don't sound like a grammar book. And then when I looked at the transcript of a scripted video, in other words, something a teacher wrote, it would be like, hello, Mr. Baker, I would like to order a chocolate cake. Yes, Mr. Smith, we have a chocolate cake right here in our case. How much do you want? And so on. It's very stiff. Did you notice? No slang, no curse words, no and no banging your fist on saying it's too expensive and this whole store is one big ripoff. And okay, someone got angry and forgot they were being recorded, and so that was fun. So you get fun moments. So I actually compared the two, and that's why you have to know a little bit of the language first. Otherwise, when someone starts swearing and talking vernacular, you're like, what? You wouldn't understand that. So that's what I did, was compare the two transcripts of people doing non-scripted and people doing scripted. And I'm going to skip all the stuff all that kind of stuff. This is all the materials I use. You could tell this was a long time ago. VCR and VHS. That's something your grandmother used or your great grandmother used. But you write down exactly what you used. And then of course these are the names of the videos that I used from the people who wrote that, which is so I analyzed 22 extracts from scripted and in other words 22 transcripts, 11 transcripts from scripted videos and 11 transcripts from non-scripted videos, and each side lasts about an hour. So an hour conversation of TV and an hour conversation of some grammar book. And it took me a year to do this. So that was my, and the non-scripted videos were intended for a French audience, okay? Somebody was making a documentary about bakeries and French life or something. And so I used that as my, kind of like that TV show, Looking for Italy and Looking for Mexico. I don't know if it's a TV show where some lady goes to Mexico and keeps looking for things to eat, Mexican food to eat. And the other one is some guy goes to Italy and finds, anyway, it was a culture show. So that's what I took it from. And then this is the procedure. Okay, I already told you my procedure is what I reviewed the transcripts, I reviewed the body language, naturalness of language used, slang. You also get to learn body language. Bah, bah. Okay, that means I've had it up to here. Okay, but in France they go like this. Okay, that means I've had it up to. So the guy was saying to the baker, like this, and the other one's going like this. So a lot of body language. It was really funny. So obviously the non-scripted was way more interesting than the very stilted, yes, Mr. Baker, and here's your cake. But that's okay if you're learning Chinese. If I said to you, 现在我给你这个东西, if I keep it really simple, that you barely understand, I gave you the cake. And so the interest level is, what did you say? I gave you a cake. You see? And you're still interested because you barely understand what's being said. But if you're a more advanced person, you'd be like that. So that's basically, So this was my table. Back in the day before, this was written before Microsoft Word. Can you believe that? This was done before Microsoft Word. It was done in a program known as WordPerfect. So this was a long time ago, before graphs. That was what it looked like, what my graphs looked like, which is hilarious when you think about it. And this was my methods, and this is I looked at both of them, and then the focus of my study. And see, I'm going to skip all the inverted and uninverted question forms, formal and vernacular negation, pronouns, object, reflexive, all of this stuff. I compared the two, and obviously I found more curse words and more body language in people actually talking rather than some grammar book. So that's why you need to study native speakers, because otherwise, if all you study is the grammar book and you go to that country, people could tell right away you are a walking grammar book. They'll laugh at you behind your back. Okay, and also you use outdated slang. That's another thing grammar books are bad at, is keeping up with the latest slang. So if I were to say, "Hey man, do you dig it? It's really groovy out there, isn't it?" How old do I sound? Did you dig it?
Not young.
Right, you don't sound
Not
young. Yet that's how old the grammar book would sound. And the native speakers are like, they see you looking so young and using the grandparents talk. It doesn't match. Although with my gray hair it does, but not with you. So you want to learn a little of both. And so this is also focus of the study. I'm not going to read all of that. So what does the methods section do, and why is it important to have a precise methods section?
So you got your methods sections. You explain how, basically how, where, why, when, everything that you did to get your results, or to do your test your hypothesis.
So
And it has to be precise, because other people need to replicate your results later
and
on.
they did. It came out the same. So that means that my professor was very happy. That's what peer review is. Projection of results. So then after I did all of my research, then the content analysis should yield results that would help determine the role of each video would play in language analysis. Before we do our analysis, we predict what the results will be based on previous literature review. In this way, when we do our actual experiment, we have a baseline to compare our results to what we previously know, and then what we know, how we deviated from the norm and from what we have discovered that is new. And so I projected in the very beginning, I said the non-scripted video is great for advanced students, and then I said that scripted video is great for beginners. Now I've got to prove it. So that was my projection. And then these were the reasons. And so for the most part, my results coincided with my predictions. It took me a year to do all the counting and analysis by watching the different videos and analyzing the input of each video. And so it was hard, but actually when I was young, I had fun doing this. And so I put all of the numbers, you can use tables and graphs to show your results. So this study shows that inverted questions, does he go to the supermarket, is hardly used in daily conversation. Do you talk like that? Does he go to the supermarket? Or would you say, hey, did you do your groceries, Don? Hey, where's my milk? Okay, forget about the groceries. Where's my milk? Did you get the milk? Did you get the whatever it is? So that's what native speakers would be more like, he goes to the supermarket? So that's basically what I did was, look at inverted questions here. And this is an example of after you write your graph, then you're going to write down what is it this graph talks about. Otherwise, if I were just to show you this graph, you would not understand that. So that's an example of quantitative research and qualitative research. And nobody says s'il vous plaît anymore. In the book it kept saying,
Really?
Yeah, in the book it kept saying, can I have a piece of cake, please? Or can I do this, please? And boy, people were kind of rude. In real life, people don't say please. I mean, when you think about it, when you go to a grocery store, how many times do you hear people say please? In one?
Unless they ask me for something, never.
Yeah, it's more like move or something like that, or something like
Yeah.
that. Move it, or I'm in a hurry. When is it going to be done? How come you guys taking so long? That's more like people in a hurry looking at their watch. And if you keep people waiting, hey, what about me? No, I came first. No, I come first. That's pretty much please. And meanwhile, the grammar books had please after every sentence. Nobody says please, even back then. And so here I wrote the results. And so my analysis of scripted and non-scripted video reveals that teachers should write grammar books and teach from grammar books for mostly low-level students, and high-level students can go and watch television. And so this is more about the results, okay? And because it's more conversational, you know, you learn the conversational and the body language. And so which has a more vernacular and more complex language structure with more fillers and incomplete turns. Non-scripted or scripted video?
Non-scripted.
Non-scripted, like watching television. Even television, when you allow the actors to make up stuff, you know, so some actors will add in stuff that wasn't written on the script, and that actually makes. I remember working on Hercules. I used to be an editor for the Hercules TV series, and and so we would write the script. I would edit. They would write the script. I would edit the script, and then by the time it got to the actors, they would ad lib. You know, because they would read the script and go, oh, my character wouldn't say something like that. And then they would ad lib, and then when they ad lib, they would add more natural sounding, non-scripted language that sounded more like what their characters would say. So they used the script more as a template, you know, like a starting point. They weren't supposed to do that because most movies don't do that. You go directly from the script. But those two knew how to ad lib off of each other. I don't know if you watched it. It was the Hercules from Kevin Sorbo and what was the other guy's name? Michael Hurst. You could tell it was a long time. It was a long time ago. And
I think I saw it.
Yeah, and then at the very end of the show, they were like, and we did it our way. We're singing the Frank Sinatra, meaning they didn't follow the script. They were so proud of the fact they didn't follow the script. We did it our way. Yeah, that's what they sang. That was really funny. I was an editor for an editor of the editor. So I was so unimportant that my name is not even listed in any of the credits. And the person I was working for, her name was barely there. It wasn't even there. So, you know, it's like subletting of the subletting of the subletting. Anyway, so by the time you get to the discussion, you know, real world implications. So by the time you finish with your results, so after the you tie your results to the real world, and you use, you know, I already said it. The real world implication is the NNS, non-native speaker, is great with advanced speakers, and then the native speakers, the low-level people, go with the grammar book. And then, you know, you write down everything, and you can read this. I'll send this. If I still have this PowerPoint, I'll send this PowerPoint to you, and you can read it all in. But you get the idea that the real world. You know, have you ever studied a language before? And then what I found interesting was that at the very end, I wrote that I only did my research in French. So it would be much more interesting if somebody did the same experiment, but did it in Spanish, Japanese, or Chinese to replicate my results. Is it true if you're learning, say, Russian, that if you're an advanced Russian speaker, you could watch Russian TV, whereas if you're a beginning Russian speaker, you should learn from a grammar book? So somebody needs to do like research in other languages, like in French or in and that kind of stuff, and in French or in Spanish and that kind of stuff too. That's what I had at the very end of my, you know, the very end of it, because I only did it French, so that's just an European language. So if you were to do it in Spanish, that's why if you're a graduate student looking to think about your own topic, that's why you go to the very end. You read the abstract, and then you go to the very end to see what you could do. And that's how you can read that for your literature review. That's how you can read 100 articles.